So, let's talk about LuFisto. And how she's being treated right now. On the internet, mostly. Obviously, people that love her and know her, and people in the business, and her longtime fans are not buying into this bullshittery. But Twitter is kind of being extremely toxic, as it tends to be. Um, this all started when she made some tweets, some comments about the AEW women's division and what the fuck is going on there. On July 27th, here's her first tweet. She says, "It's cute how people blame booking for a bad women's division. Talent with too much power, talent denigrating each other, talent trash talking potential employees so they never get in as soon as they walk in. It starts here. Signed, the one you called a fucking French-Canadian asshole." So that was her first tweet. And that was pretty much taken and blown out of fucking proportion real quick. Real quick. She just got lambasted. And I think that it's necessary to discuss LuFisto in a more open sort of format here. And that's kind of what I want to do. I'm going to go into a little bit of her history. I'm going to go into her claims on AEW, and if I personally feel like they're valid, which, let's just get that out of the way, I do. I have my own personal issues with AEW. We could go into that some other time, if y'all want me to. But their base issue seems to be that regardless of gender, if you are not in that top group of people who are friends with that top group of people who are booking the matches, then you're kind of screwed in general. You're going to be relegated to dark and elevation. And they don't really have enough time, minutes-wise, to give to everybody that they got on their roster. They kind of expanded, like, way too quickly, in my opinion. They have so many fucking people. I think I've heard in the women's division over there, I've heard the number 60 thrown around. They have about 60 women on their roster. How are you going to fit that? I don't know. And they don't. They don't fit that. They brought in too many people without enough time to do anything with them. Like I said, this isn't really a video on my issues with AEW or even on the women's booking issue overall over in AEW. This is a video on LuFisto and why I don't think that she should be being taken down so hard like she has been. She talked about a lot of shit in later tweets and in later interviews. She did a really good one with Sean Ross Sapp over from Fightful. If you haven't watched that interview with her, go watch it. She talks a lot of interesting shit about what's going down. She talks in depth about her experience over there, her problems with some people like Dusty Rhodes and Ruby Soho. And I think it's a good watch. She kind of spent not a lot of time over there, as she even herself admits. She basically had like one little dark match, I think it was dark, and she never got called back. And these issues seem to be why she was never called back. Like, she's talking about some women are screwing each other over. Like, you'll be planning a match, and then you go out there, and suddenly you're doing this B-tier, C-tier match, and you look like a mess, and nothing really fits, and the ring psychology just isn't necessarily there. And it seems that sometimes those things are happening on purpose. It's a feature, not a bug. I don't know. I mean, I obviously don't know anything about the locker room culture. I can only hear people's sides of the story and translate that back over to what we see happening on TV. And her side of the story seems pretty fucking accurate. You can also talk about, like, I remember, like, back in the fucking pandemic era, when they were at Daly's place, AEW was, bringing in a lot of people, like, indie people, for a couple weeks at a time. They would have a few matches, and then they would be gone, and you never really see them again. And I remember I was, like, a huge Twitch fan during that era. So I was following, like, a lot of indie wrestlers on Twitch and watching them talk about shit. And hearing their takes on things and just being a general fucking dork around that time. But I remember that the general sentiment from a lot of people coming out of that pandemic era AEW time was that they kind of expected it to be this, like, pro wrestling summer camp. Like, they expected, like, you know, the older veterans to kind of want to talk to them, to want to help them out. And maybe they would get some pointers, they would get some critiques that were actually useful by being there. And a lot of them kind of talked about how it wasn't that at all. I remember hearing stories of people like, you can't even go up to these higher up people, like, and even talk to them. There was nobody really watching these matches in a way to critique them on it and actually get anything out of the experience, like, character development wise, or, like I said, ring psychology wise. It's really hard to go over there for these lesser known people, and come out of it with anything positive. I heard that from a lot of people. It's not just LuFisto, and it's not just now. I mean, I heard about these things back in 2020, 2021 shit. It was kind of like a negative environment from what I heard. Very cliquey. She basically said what a lot of people have been feeling. And she says it herself in this interview with Sean Ross Sapp, which is where I'm getting a lot of my notes here. Yeah, ignore me, I'm, like, reading my notes. But I wanted to make sure that I have everything here. She kind of talks about how a lot of people were, like, fearful of their jobs, or fearful of their place, or fearful if they said something then they wouldn't get their jobs, which is kind of what happened in LuFisto. She was called in for a potential coaching position, and nothing ever really came of it past that one match that she had, because from her perspective, what happened is that her match got fucked on purpose, and nobody really wanted to mess with her after that in the AEW world. Her claims didn't come out of nowhere, by the way. She's not just, like, tweeting this for fun, like, tweeting this out of bitterness or anything like that. Her tweets came out of a place of response to that sign that's going around AEW. I think a lot of y'all have seen it. If you watch AEW, I don't really think there's a way that you haven't seen it. It's that sign that says, book the women's division better. Not really hard to argue with, in my opinion. And she just put out her opinions on why the women's division isn't being booked that well. Or at least why we're not seeing much come out of the women's division over there. A lot of her career, LuFisto's career, has been spent championing women in the sport. She's really kind of put her neck on the line many a time to make shit less shitty in a general sense. And here's kind of where I want to go into a bit of her history. She is an interesting woman. She started wrestling like way, 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 way back. She has like over 20 years of experience at this point. And she started wrestling in Canada, which is a little bit of a different environment than the US wrestling scene kind of is. And especially back then, late 90s, early 2000s, when she was coming up. Let's take a fucking second here before we dive deep into LuFisto's wrestling history, because I got some shit to tell y'all. Yeah. So LuFisto, like I said, is somebody who's kind of always done whatever she's doing to further women in this weird sports entertainment, whatever it is, world of the pro wrestling business. She's talked a lot about how when she was coming up, there weren't many women around her. When she first started training, she was actually the only woman in her school. And then subsequently, when she started getting booked, it was really hard for her to get booked for a long time because there weren't many other women around. And so there weren't many places for her on cards. It kind of turned into a thing where she felt that she either had to start doing intergender matches or be left off cards. And you all know me. I am such a proponent of intergender wrestling. This is something that is extremely close to my heart. I am so on board with it. I'm so on board with it. I think it's extremely important, both within the sport and within our wider view of women as a whole. I could talk about this just itself forever. How we portray women in the pro wrestling sphere, I think it really does translate to how people view women outside of it in their day-to-day lives. And I think intergender wrestling can do a fuckload for just advancing feminism in your everyday. She was wrestling a lot around Canada in her early days, and she came up against some big issues in Ontario. So in 2002 in Ontario, the Athletic Commission threatened to withdraw a license for a show that she was booked on based off of an intergender match that she was going to be a part of on that card. She basically thought this was bullshit, because it was. She saw things all around her in Canada where, like, for example, she's talked about how a lot of films are filmed in Canada, and she's looking one direction and she's seeing stunt women fighting stunt men on film sets, and there's no issue here, but these equally trained and equally talented women over in the pro wrestling world can't get on a card because they can't fight a man due to these regulations in the commission. She fought this. She filed a complaint with the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And it took years. But in 2006, finally, they'd convinced the Athletic Commission to drop their intergender wrestling regulations. And during this span of research and court shit that all of this had to go through, these all 3 years this was kind of chugging through the legal system, they'd kind of come to the realization that a lot of the regulations that were surrounding pro wrestling in Ontario at that time were unnecessary and were hindering things in all aspects. And they got a lot of shit chopped off of that commission regulations, and in the coming years it really kind of revitalized and reinvigorated the Ontario independent wrestling scene in many, many ways, and not least of which being the availability of intergender matches now. She has talked about having a lot of like pushback from people in the industry during this time when she was filing these complaints. Um, she's talked about, you know, being told that she's causing problems, uh, being told that she's doing shit that doesn't need to be done, that this could harm pro wrestling in a large way if she carried on like this. And obviously, all of those things are untrue. Um, she did a lot, and those ramifications of what she got done back in 2002 to 2006 are still ringing. And waves and ripples from this are still helping the independent scenes, not just in Ontario, but across Canada. Um, and of course, it kind of like funneled down here too. Intergender wrestling was kind of not viewed the same way that we view it now. Like, me being like a GC dub nerd, for example, it's like I'm used to this shit from the very beginning of me watching wrestling. I have seen this. It's never been weird to me. But for a lot of people, it was for a very long time, and sadly, for a lot of people, it really still is. Like, obviously, it's really hard for us to see any sort of intergender shit on TV still. That's a big issue. Like, I talk about this a lot, like, in my personal conversations with friends and stuff, when people are like, well, what would you do to fix XYZ? And usually it's, what would you do to fix the women's division, or what would you do to fix tag divisions? Because those are kind of my two, like, hills that I'll fucking die on for pro wrestling, is that there needs to be something done, regardless of company. Like, this is like an industry-wide issue. Like, what the fuck are we doing with our women, and the fuck are we doing with our tag teams? And my main statement is that if we just did some intergender shit on a TV level, I think a lot of these issues would just be gone. Like, out the window, gone. If you were able to throw women onto the card in other spaces, like in these intergender spaces, or make intergender tag teams, or have a women's tag team fight a men's tag team, and like not have these like hard line divisions, I think that you would get a lot more people on TV in a lot more ways. I think it would fix a lot of shit. Yeah, I just think that there's like so much that needs to be fixed in many divisions across company lines, like I said. And I think that LuFisto's standing up for some shit. And her entire history has been standing up for some shit. Like, let's talk about some of her other huge accomplishments. Because that's not the only thing that she's known for. If any of y'all remember back when LuFisto got inducted into the GCW Indie Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2020, I think it was, basically that's kind of like the one thing that people focused on, was her big legal fight in Ontario. But she's done a lot of shit to break barriers and carve paths for women throughout the wrestling world. You know, she was the first woman to hold the CZW Ironman Championship in 2006. She pinned Kevin Steen for it. Love it. Check that one out, IWTV, if you haven't seen it. Very, very fun. She was the first woman to wrestle in the Cage of Death in 2006 again. She really, like, broke that glass ceiling in CZW and in a lot of hardcore wrestling. In those early 2000s eras. Like, she was right up there with, like, people like Mickey Knuckles, who were doing this shit at a caliber that hadn't really been seen from women. Obviously, hardcore wrestling is my thing. I mean, look behind me, that's my shit. I love deathmatch wrestling, and I don't think that a lot of the people that I love watching today would be doing what they were doing if it wasn't for what LuFisto was doing like 20 years ago. Yeah, sometimes we just need a minute. If we want to go back to some Canadian accomplishments, she was the first ever winner of the Stranglehold Wrestling Deathmatch Tournament in 2006, which was the first ever deathmatch tournament in Canada, and she won it. This wasn't like a women's tournament, this was a tournament, and she won that. She was the queen of the deathmatch in 2007, IWA Mid-South. She kind of like was one of those inaugural champs. Obviously that tournament was kind of like created for Mickey Knuckles in a lot of ways, but after that first one, it kind of opened the doors for American women's deathmatch wrestling to explode. I think even still to this day, a lot of people would consider King of the Deathmatch and Queen of the Deathmatch to be some of the highest rated deathmatch tournaments going on stateside. She has all of these accomplishments that people don't talk about. And especially people aren't talking about these days because all that people want to talk about right now is demeaning her accomplishments and like calling her names and focusing on her appearance, which is so unnecessary, and focusing on that one AEW match that is really getting a lot of shit. Where, like I said, that match was kind of choreographed on purpose for her to look like she wasn't really that important and wasn't really worth being on AEW TV on a long-term basis. Yeah, there's more to her than just the shit that you're seeing right now. And the shit that you're seeing right now is thinly veiled misogyny. That's what I'll say. None of this shit would be happening to a dude. I think we can kind of all agree with that. And I think that it really has a lot of interesting tie-ins to Taya Valkyrie recently. Had some bullshit go down where she botched one move in an AEW match. And after that, she was kind of just lambasted on the internet. Absolutely dragged through the fucking mud. And you're seeing a lot of those similar comments now being thrown LuFisto's way. Like, I'm really sick of the, like, you're hard to work with. I'm sick of the, they're ugly. I'm sick of the, they look like a man. I'm so tired of this shit. Because none of this has anything to do with their talent and what they could actually be giving to the pro wrestling world. I mean, MJF put out this tweet pretty recently. I'm not gonna read it word for word because I don't think that motherfucker deserves it. Fuck MJF for many a reason. Not a fucking fan of his. But he decided to throw his fucking 2 cents in the ring here and become a part of this whole discourse. He was talking about that there's like a few reasons if somebody just kind of like hasn't made it in wrestling after a long period of time in the business. Obviously, he was kind of pointing this at LuFisto. He was talking about how you're either hard to work with or you're just really not talented. And it's kind of just bullshit. Like, everything he was saying in there kind of doesn't really take into account the lived experiences of women in the wrestling world. Especially back at the time when LuFisto was cutting her teeth and becoming who she is today, she had to deal with a lot of bullshit. And so did many other women. Like, she's talked about so many women that she has seen coming up who were unbelievable talents and really had potential and just fucking quit because they couldn't deal with this, like, macho-ass sausage fest that wrestling kinda was and low-key still is. I don't think he takes into account that in a general sense, like, let's, like, throw wrestling to the side for a second and let's just talk in a general sense here. I think a lot of times when women choose to speak their minds on whatever that issue may be, they are deemed unprofessional, they are deemed difficult, and they are deemed rude. And that's ridiculous. I'm trying to, like, get my words here without getting too mad, but oh boy could I get mad. I don't know. I feel like we need to be hearing women's stories, not just in the ways that you want to hear them, but sometimes you have to hear the hard truths. And the hard truths are that many women that you see on your screens, these wrestlers have gone through some bullshit to get there. I also think that MJF's tweets don't take into account the myriad reasons why people might not even necessarily be interested in a long-term TV wrestling life, be that WWE or AEW. I know that for, like, an extremely long time, and arguably still today, the general consensus is that if you never get a TV contract, then you're not doing it right. I don't think the indies are a stepping stone. I don't think that they have to be. I think that they can be their own entity, and they can be a place where pro wrestlers of all different styles, genders, whatever it may be, can be seen and respected and properly booked. Like, we could talk about this in relation to, like, let's say Joey Janela, who was one of the OG AEW signees. And he kind of floundered for, like, years over there and never really got the spots that he should have gotten. He had a cool tag team for a while with Sunny Kiss, missed that, loved that tag team. But he kind of never, like, graduated up to this, like, main event scene. And he didn't feel like he was being properly paid or properly booked. And eventually, he just kind of dipped. He's said multiple times that he's making more money and has more free time, generally living the indie life, mostly GCW these days, than he did when he was on contract full-time over at AEW. I get that. I see that. And I think that he's doing some of his best work these days, with what he's doing over in AEW. And, I mean, what he's doing in GCW. Way more thought out storylines, long-term, extensive booking. Like, that's the shit that I live for, you know? It's like, I just think that the indies can be more than what TV wrestling can be. And if TV wrestling's what you're into, that's cool as hell, that's fine. Not yucking your yum. But, like, when I look at pro wrestling from the point of view of, I want to be watching something where I know that the people that I'm watching feel comfortable where they are, both financially and professionally, I feel like I'm getting that out of the indies way more than I'm getting that on TV wrestling. And I think we can see that coming to a head with all of these women's division debacles. Like, whether it's LuFisto or Taya getting screwed over for what goes on in AEW, whether it's Rhea and Becky not getting booked for SummerSlam over in the E, these are overarching issues. And I think that the base issue is that women aren't being necessarily respected. Respected as performers and respected as people. I think LuFisto has a right to tell her stories. I think everyone has a right to tell their stories. I don't think that you should get so attacked on the internet to the point where you feel like you have to voluntarily not take bookings because you don't want to be like the talk of the show because of what's going on outside of that particular show. I just think that there's too much. There's too much happening. It's thinly veiled misogyny. And I think that she has a right to say what she said. I think that she has a right to respond to these motherfuckers on Twitter who are coming after her for no goddamn reason. I've seen so many things saying, like, oh my god, well, she should just shut up, and she should just let it lie, and she said what she said, she doesn't have to keep fucking going and responding to everybody. And every single one of those sentiments has been from a man, by the way. Let me just get that out of the way. I don't see anything wrong with a human being, and definitely I don't see anything wrong with a woman choosing to defend herself against people that are saying absolutely ludicrous shit that has nothing to do with the issue. People bringing up shit from, like, years ago, or like, oh my god, well, you did this one thing, and now we hate you regardless of everything else that you've ever done. I think this is a trailblazer of women's wrestling being brought down by a bunch of feral Twitter dudes who are just simping so hard for AEW for some reason. I think a lot of these issues do come down to AEW fans are just, like, generally assholes. Sorry, not sorry. I was one for a while, so I'm calling myself out on that. I think that AEW really kind of, like, brainwashes and, like, really, like, pigeonholes these people into being like, if you like AEW, you have to hate everything that is against AEW. Like, for what? For what? For what? I will go on about this forever. I think that if I keep making videos like this, a lot of these sentiments you'll hear a lot more often, that we should just love pro wrestling if you love pro wrestling. I don't know why things have to be so, like, us versus them, and, like, AEW fans versus LuFisto, and, like, any of these things. I don't get why it has to be that. Like, pro wrestling as a whole can be better, and I don't think it'll ever get better if people don't speak up about this shit. I think one really cool quote that came out of LuFisto's interview with Sean Ross Sapp was when she said, "Women's wrestling sucks if you allow it to." Like, let that sink in for a second. Women's wrestling sucks if you allow it to. That's it. Women's wrestling sucks right now because it is being allowed to suck. Whether you're talking the WWE bullshit or this AEW stuff, it sucks because people are letting it suck. Because there are people in these back rooms that are saying, you get time tonight, and you get time tonight, and you don't get time tonight, who are making these active decisions. And I think that has to change if we're going to get anywhere into some form of a future where there's some sort of egalitarian rule in pro wrestling. But I think we're far away from that, and that sucks. I think people like LuFisto have to keep speaking out and sharing their stories and sharing their takes on why some shit is the way that it is. Because we're never going to get a full story without hearing different sides to these stories. Like, I know that fucking Dustin Rhodes has come out to refute this shit, and, like, Ruby and Saraya have talked about this stuff. I think a few other women, Britt maybe, have kind of come out to dispute the things that LuFisto has insinuated are going on in the AEW women's locker room. And, like, obviously they're gonna refute it, because, like LuFisto was talking about, like, these are women who are trying to keep their jobs. And they're keeping their jobs by keeping others down, if you want to believe that this is the type of shit that's occurring in the locker room. And so why would we take their word over LuFisto's? I think that if you're going to say that any of them are disputable, I think that all of them should be disputable. I think we need to have, like, equal footing here. Like, people like, oh, well, LuFisto hasn't been in the locker room for that long of a time. She hasn't been in there for so many years now. Shit might have changed. At the same time, you have to say, why would people like Dustin Rhodes, people like Ruby and Saraya and Britt, why would they say, oh yeah, actually, like, she's right, and this is fucked, and we do have some problems? They're not going to admit that. If they are the ones who are causing the problems, they are not going to admit to the problems. I could go on and on and on. Leave LuFisto alone. I will be the fucking Britney Spears girl over here, like, leave LuFisto alone! This poor woman has gone through so much shit. She has waded through so much mud and disgustingness to be where she is. She is a veteran of the sport. She is a trailblazer for women's wrestling in North America. She is somebody who deserves to be respected for all of her accomplishments. Not just the shit that gets talked about all the time. And she doesn't deserve to be called these fucking names like it's a middle school playground. Like, why is Twitter like that? Why is Twitter like that? I don't know. Can you tell me? Like fucking Blue's Clues out here. Like, why is Twitter like that? Your fucking guess is as good as mine. I guess that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I hope that I got into everything, and I hope that I kind of covered that in a followable way. Yeah, if y'all want to hear me talk about more pro wrestling shit, whatever the hell is going on, I like long overarching stories. I like to get deep into the weeds on why some shit is the way that it is. Uh, yeah, I like doing this shit. I'm a fucking nerd, if you couldn't tell. But, yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed this. This whole talk was something that I really wasn't gonna be able to get as into as I wanted to, over on my main podcast, Revenant Wrestling Network, on Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are found, if you're interested in that. It's kind of like I can dip my feet into these issues, like kind of dip my toes into these issues over there on my podcast, but these big issues, like especially these like controversial big issues, I feel like some things need their own space and time to be discussed, and it's kind of what I was trying to do over here. So I hope y'all liked it. I hope this was informative. And I'd love to hear what y'all's takes on this issue is. Pretty sure I'm going to be throwing this up on YouTube, so I guess leave some comments and shit down below. I would love to start a discourse on this kind of stuff. I love hearing people's opinions, and if your opinions are different, that's totally cool. I am totally down to hear differing opinions in a respectful manner. I just don't think that a lot of these negative opinions on LuFisto are being displayed respectfully these days. Yeah, leave LuFisto alone, and maybe go watch some of her matches. If you haven't really watched anything from LuFisto, I could give you 1,000 fucking match recs, but what I'm gonna tell you to do is to just go onto YouTube, search Beyond Wrestling LuFisto. You will find dozens upon dozens of full-ass matches for free. And you will be able to see her real talent, working with so many fucking people, and especially with this younger generation of talent recently. She's really kind of become someone who uses her platform to lift other women up. And I think that's important, and that's what we should be talking about when it comes to LuFisto. That everything that she has done in her pro wrestling career, from back in 2002 when she started her fight with the Ontario Athletic Commission, to right the fuck now when she is inadvertently starting this whole AEW discourse. Everything that she has done has been in an attempt to further women's pro wrestling. And I love her. So thank you, LuFisto, for existing and continuing to exist in the face of all this bullshittery. Go support her, go throw her a follow, go check out some of her matches if you're really not that aware, and go check me out. Check out my other podcast, Revenant Wrestling Network. Check out my Insta, you probably already know it, Manic Pixie Belle. And stay tuned here on YouTube for some more deep dives, research tricks into different little bits of pro wrestling. Thanks for watching.